Today, with their junkyard Toyota now back-halved, our Xtreme team brings Project Sag and Wagon closer to hitting the trail. Plus, MIG and TIG Welding 101 and a trip to the Dakota Territory Challenge. That's all right now on Xtreme 4x4.
Recline.
Hey guys, welcome to the Xtreme shop. As you can see, we're tearing into our old wrecking yard FJ60. What used to be Sag and Wagon is going to be a great trail truck for the weekend fun.
Now these wagons really do have a cult following, and when you look around on the trail, you're going to see a lot of them out there, and guys really love to wheel these things. And so to keep with that whole Toyota theme, we've been upgrading this thing one step at a time, but keeping most of the base parts still Toyotas. Oh.
We've already upgraded the axles both front and rear with new shafts, gears, and selectable lockers.
And now the rear axle is hung on a double triangulated forelink with some monster heim joints, and it's sitting on some new coilover shocks.
And the front axle was treated to a spring over and shackle reversal to help keep costs down. So today we're going to finish up the roll cage and do some engine work.
And for all you guys watching the show looking for some tips on welding tubing, today's your lucky day. And the roof.
We got to shorten that.
The main hoop is really the backbone of your cage. Spending time on this will make sure that everything is safe and strong. This may take a bunch of trips to the vendor and a lot of measuring, but it will be worth it.
Positioning the hoop would be the guidelines for the rest of the tubing. Make sure it is level and looking correct side to side. Then it's just a matter of measure, cut, notch, bend, tack, and then repeat. And always remember, triangulation is your friend when building a cage. All right, so the cage is built and tacked together, and you're probably wondering, how in the heck am I gonna weld on top of the roll cage? Because of course you want your tubing as high as you can get so you have extra headroom inside the cab. Well, we got a cool little trick to show you.
Where every down tube meets the floor, we went ahead and cut a hole.
Ow, this freaking hurts. With the floor plates removed, the entire cage is lowered. Then we can finish weld the top of the tubes. Afterwards, the cage can be raised back into place.
These floor plates will slide under the down tube, and later, we'll weld them to the frame. Now, I know what you're thinking. What are they doing drilling holes in a perfectly good roll cage everywhere where the tubing meets? Well, there's a reason behind that. If you remember, when we rebuilt our axles front and rear, we put in ARB air lockers. And those air lockers need compressed air to run. And the compressed air comes from this little mini compressor that we also got from ARB. It's a good idea when you put one of these in to have a storage tank to store up some air. Now you can go ahead and put one of these steel tanks pretty much anywhere you want in the truck, but it's going to take up some space. We got a super trick little idea here. What we're doing is basically using the rear hoop, these two outer tubes, and the main hoop as our air storage tank. By drilling these holes at the intersection, it's going to allow the air to hold in the whole cage. All we have to do later is basically drill an adapter fitting here for the compressed air to get in, another one below it to come out, down the link, and then just right into the locker. Genius.
The FJ60 really is considered a mid to full size cab, but if you're building a mini truck like a Toyota pickup or a Ford Ranger, or you just need more room inside, you always have the option of moving your roll cage out a little bit and putting it into this pillar. All you have to do is cut a groove for the tubing, slide it in, and then weld the sheet metal to the roll cage, and you're good to go.
Probably one of the neatest things we're trying to pull off with this truck is with these rear doors. This thing started life as a wagon, and we're going to try and keep it looking that way, and then eventually use these doors to get into the back of the truck. This is very awkward here. Hold me close.
Dude, let me take something.
We fabbed up a mount in order to use the rear latch mechanism.
It's looking like a wagon again. Wow, good job, Ian.
No sweat, Jessi.
Looks very innovative. Now the last thing that we have to do here is shorten the roof. We left it extra long so we were able to bring it up and meet up with this back bar here. So the first thing we gotta do is mark out the cut line with some masking tape. I will cut the roof using a Sawzall and then shorten it up to meet the rear tube.
Let it fall, Jessi.
Later on Xtreme, Ian and Jessi go step by step through the tube welding process. But up next, serious trails await these competitors at the Dakota Territory Challenge. Stay tuned.
You're watching Xtreme 4x4, where we're in the middle of cutting up this 85 Land Cruiser, basically back halving it, turning it into a really good trail truck.
We redesigned both the front and rear suspension for some serious articulation, something every good trail truck needs for serious rocks. For 23 years, the Black Hills four-wheelers have put on one of the toughest trail rides in the country, the Dakota Territory Challenge.
Woohoo! There's usually 100 rigs from all over the country that come out here to wheel with us for 4 days, just so they can come out here and do the hardest, nastiest stuff that we have to offer.
Located west of Rapid City, the 50-plus trails all have one common denominator. Most people have a tendency to think that South Dakota is nothing but flat and barren, but really it's full of big cliffs and big, gigantic rocks. This place is badass.
They don't know what to expect when they come to the challenge. And they come and they're going, oh my gosh, look at this.
I pray to the rock gods. This is my church.
It's amazing how much fun you can have every time you come out because you can take different lines. The obstacles do change throughout the day and throughout the year depending on rainfalls and other people throwing rocks around. So you pretty much can learn new stuff every time you come out.
Jason Pauly grew up on these trails, and as a pro rock crawler and rig builder, he knows what it takes to conquer the Black Hills.
These trails are pretty tough. Good suspension is great. Quality of parts and really well-built rig really helps the day.
He built his latest creation for Mike and Josie Knorr, who were making the Black Hill trails look very easy.
It's cool. It's third day out with it, you know, still getting used to it, but it's works awesome and it's really fun.
They had a pretty sweet CJ7 they've had for years and years and kind of reached a point where they needed something maybe a little bit more radical. Mike and Josie decided to do something a little bit crazy. They ended up with a all aluminum dual overhead cam Lexus motor of an SC400. Looks pretty radical, runs great, 265 horse. Seems to be plenty for anything he's wanting to do with it. For the steering, we went with a pretty radical way to do it. It's a fully hydraulic system, centered ram. It offers great power, really good reliability. It does offer great high speed and low speed. You never have any kickback through the steering wheel, so even big rocks you can drive with ease. The body on this buggy does resemble an old CJ like they used to have. We put some pretty fancy paint on it to make it look cool when it's brand new.
See, some of these trails, they're not just for the little guys, they're for the big full-size guys too.
You better not like your body. You will get damage out here.
You hear the scraping, but I'm used to that sound by now. Screep! You can tell that I don't much care if I bump a rock or when I'm going around a corner. But if you take your time and go through the trails right and you have really good spotters, you can get through them and not damage anything majorly and have a good time.
Two of the toughest trails in the Black Hills are the full-size and Kong, and they call it the full monkey. Some of the hard stuff included this mud-covered waterfall.
Just transmission damage today. An Eagle.
Once the first guy goes over it, it gets a little slick, gets a little mud on it, and then it makes it a little bit harder. There's a couple undercuts that are there. Hopefully we'll get to the top on the first trail.
It takes more than optimism to get through the full monkey.
The trail may have gotten the best of Ray this time, but he loves this kind of punishment.
We come back every year. It's a lot of fun, so everybody should definitely check it out. You will like South Dakota wheeling. It's some of the funnest around, most definitely.
You've heard us talk about bending and notching tubing, picking the right tubing for your project. Well, you guys asked for it. Welding Tech on steel, and most importantly, on tubing.
Now we're going to start with possibly the easiest form of welding to learn and also the most common you're going to see in a shop, and that's MIG welding. Now, MIG stands for metal inert gas, and it's a form of shielded metal arc welding. Now, the business end of a MIG welder is behind this door. Now, the first thing you notice in here is this great big roll of wire that's consumed during the welding process. We like to use Murex S4 wire because it doesn't have very much droop when you're running overhead. And this is an 035 wire, perfect for heavy fab work. Now, the wire may look copper in color, but it's actually a mild steel wire with a copper coating to keep it from rusting. Now, the wire is pulled off the spool by the drive roll mechanism, and this is where it's electrified by the transformer at the welder. Once it's pulled off the spool, it's actually fed out into a liner inside this tube and onto the gun. Now, the other thing that's running through this tube and heading up to the gun is the shielding gas mixture that comes from this cylinder on the back of the welder. That's where the MIG welder gets its name, metal inert gas. Inside here is an inert gas, and we use a mixture, 75% argon and 25% CO2. The CO2 helps strike the arc, gets good penetration into the steel, and the argon helps protect the weld when it's at its molten state.
The TIG welder is the other form of welding that we use here at Xtreme, which you'll find in most fab shops. But unlike MIG, the electrode is not consumed during the welding process, so there is no material being used unless you manually add it in yourself. Now, running from the torch to the machine is the line that carries the electric current, which is controlled by the foot pedal, and the gas. But this gas is 100% argon and not 75-25. The business end of this welder is in here. Inside of this torch is the tungsten, which is where tungsten inert gas welding gets its name. Now, tungsten comes in different sizes depending upon the thickness of metal you're going to be welding. You have 100% tungsten for aluminum, and you have 2% thoriated, which is an alloy in the tungsten for metals like stainless steel, chromoly, cast iron. Now, this electrode is what delivers the arc to create the molten puddle for the weld. And because it's made of tungsten, it's not going to melt itself. So the gas is going to come up through the line, through the torch, and through this gas lens, which is going to eliminate the turbulence for the gas cloud, which is then focused by the cup for the weld.
Now, welding with a MIG welder is actually pretty simple. Once you hook the ground clamp to the piece of work you're working on, all you have to do is set your welder to the settings found inside the machine. Simply trim your wire feed a 1/4 inch away from the end of your gun. And you just got to hold your gun at a 45-degree angle from what you're going to be welding. Flip your mask down, you're ready to go. Moving the tip in small C formations, you basically connect the two pieces of metal together. The best way to become a good welder is keep your scrap pieces around and practice, practice, practice.
He's been practicing, but as far as TIG welding, it requires a little bit more patience and a lot more practice. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your tungsten is prepped correctly. It should be sharpened to a 15 to 30 degree point for steel and have a ball up end for aluminum. Also, prep the metal to be free of any oil or grease or you will get a defective weld. Make sure you got a good ground connection and set the electrode between 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the nozzle. And remember, your filler rod should be sized to match the thickness of the material you're welding. So thinner rod for thinner metal, thicker rod for thicker metal. Keep the tungsten away from the work, because if it touches the steel, it will ground out and contaminate the electrode. You'll have to take the torch apart and sharpen it again. You can control the weld puddle size by using the foot pedal to control the amount of heat input into the metal. Once you have a molten puddle, you simply move it along the metal with the torch, alternately adding filler rod.
One of the trickiest types of welding out there is welding tubing together, because the first thing you have to worry about is make sure that your joint is good and strong, because if it's tubing, it's usually either a roll cage or a chassis. The next thing you got to worry about is you're welding one piece right on its edge where the steel is really weak, so you can actually burn that piece of steel right away and have a big gap there. Now, when it comes to welding tube together, there's a couple different techniques. The first one is bead, and the second one is stitch. A bead weld is when you run a length of weld across the two pieces of tubing, stopping only when the torch is in a poor position. A stitch weld is when you trigger weld the tubing together, basically placing a series of heavy spot welds on top of each other. Now, these two different styles of welding do breed a lot of controversy, and here's what it boils down to. When you're welding steel together, you're actually melting it together to create a bond in one joint. When you run a bead, you know that you have a uniform heat effect zone all the way across that bead. Whereas when you stitch weld, every time you start and stop, the metal can cool down, creating a series of cold joints. Now, is it weaker? You really don't know until it breaks. But in my opinion, I've always been taught, and I always did teach, if you're gonna weld a bead, strength comes first, so go for the bead. What do you think, Jess?
I fully agree with you, but I've also been told that when you're stitch welding and you're moving fast enough and you're not allowing those welds to cool down, it can be close to as strong as your continuous bead. So I think it all depends upon personal preference and how you want it to look. Hey everybody, welcome back to Xtreme 4x4. The Saggin' Wagon has been treated to a full custom roll cage, and with all the welding tips that we just went through, you should be able to weld up your own cage in no time.
And now we can start dealing with the fuel delivery system for our inline six. Trucks of this vintage were mostly carbureted, and a carbureted vehicle, especially a stock one, does not run very well off-road. So this truck's gonna lose its carb for a new EFI unit. Now we're just pulling this off for insurance because you don't know how long a truck like this has been laying around for, and you could have had a mouse climb into your intake manifold and build a nice little house in there.
Since we're dealing with the air and fuel intake, we'll deal with the exhaust at the same time. The restrictive and cracked stock manifold will be replaced with a full-length header from TPI. This chrome header with 1.5-inch primary tubes is fully welded and has a thick flange to eliminate leaks at the head. We're gonna use 2.5-inch exhaust tubing running from the collector into one of the toughest mufflers ever. This new Flowmaster off-road muffler is made of 14-gauge diamond plate steel and is basically indestructible. Plus, it still has the low restrictive flow-through design that all Flowmaster mufflers have.
Now with our manifold cleaned up and checked for obstructions, we can go ahead and start adapting in our EFI unit. Now we're using Holley's Projection 2D 670 CFM unit, and it comes with everything you need to hook it up to almost any truck. It's obviously got a throttle body unit, wiring harness, ECM, a fuel pump, all the nuts and bolts, and of course adapter plates. And then once we get the TBI unit adapted to the manifold, just bolt the manifold back onto the truck.
And then the next time you see this thing, it should be ready to rock and roll, or maybe rolling on some rocks.
I think it's gonna sound like this. Bwop! No, that's a V8.
No.
Like bleep!
It's a 2F, dude.
Bleep!
There you go.